is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Welcome to United Front Radio. We're exploring the ideas that once made America great and how we can implement them again today. This is Daniela Walls, chair of the Tax Wall Street Party, and Kyle McCarthy, founding member of the United Front Against Austerity. For the last 3 weeks, we've been discussing issues related to the world of pure imagination, how cultural agents like Russell Brand push truth seekers and activists out of concrete political action and into New Age mysticism, utopian politics, and even the occult. Those of us who have been shaped by the truth movement and independent media are especially susceptible to such cultural programming. How far can we let our imaginations run wild before we need to come back down to earth? Today, Kyle and I discuss our own journeys trying to strike a balance between reason and imagination, and between research and action.
Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Daniela, I have a confession.
Oh, God, what? What kind of opening to a show is this?
I revel in wild disinformation.
You're not supposed to scare me at the opening of the show.
I think tonight we should talk about to the people out there who are sort of in the truth community, this conflict between practical politics and conspiracy information, if you want to call it that.
Oh, okay.
I think we've sort of been on both sides of the spectrum, and just talking about how they can complement each other, how they can conflict with each other, just in our experience where we've sort of fallen on that spectrum, and how we can simultaneously stay interested in conspiracy theories and then at the same time put that aside and engage in this more practical stuff.
Okay, since you put it that way, I revel in disinformation too.
Yes.
Well, sometimes when we're doing research together during the day, we just get so tired of practical politics and we want to go over to the reptilians. We need a mental break, like, let's delve into the occult. It's just more fun sometimes.
Yeah, but it's not to make light of it. I mean, I think it's hard because if everybody out there understood that the world is run by a cabal of pedophiles, for example, we'd be able to get somewhere pretty quickly.
Or is the world just run by pedophiles, not necessarily a cabal of pedophiles?
Well, but at the same time, if you unravel the fact that the world is run by a cabal of pedophiles, that still doesn't tell you what to do about free trade or what to do about youth unemployment, or how do you connect these two ends of the spectrum? Where, you know, some people are afraid to use the term conspiracy theory because it's been turned into a pejorative term just to discredit people, but it is, if you don't think there are conspiracies, you're crazy. Every business is a conspiracy. You know, this show is a conspiracy. We're working together to try to...
A conspiracy of two. Right when you said cabal of pedophiles, thunder went off.
Oh my God.
Like Dracula.
We've been both following the work of this guy named Thomas Sheridan, who's an Irish... I hear the thunder.
Yeah, that's going to be background for the show.
All right. He was talking about this case of Jimmy Savile, who was like the... how would you describe him? He's almost like the Oprah or like the Johnny Carson of Britain.
He was like a top of the pops guy. He was a mix between...
Like Dick Clark.
He was like a Dick Clark, yeah, more of a throwback than a modern talk show host. He was big, popular, like Ed Sullivan. He started around the time before the Beatles.
Yeah, like the late 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of a guy, but with incredible connections and incredible power. He was a nationally respected figure in terms of charity work, and he toured with the Beatles when they first came out. He was hanging out with the Rolling Stones, with very direct connections to the royal family. Only 3 honorary Green Berets have ever been awarded, or in modern times have been awarded by the British military.
Wasn't he the uncle or brother of Prince Philip?
No, that's a conspiracy theory.
See, we're getting everything mixed up. Okay.
But I was going to say, so the 3 Green Berets went to Prince Philip, who's the Queen's male consort, to Prince Charles, and to Jimmy Savile, this Top of the Pops guy. So it's, he's a big deal in Britain. Mm-hmm. And he turns out to be...
Let's say we awarded 2 Green Berets to Lincoln, Eisenhower, and
Oprah.
Yeah, and Oprah. Be like, what?
Right. So this character, who's a pop star, he's connected to all these famous people and everything else, turns out to be a serial pedophile, child abuser, and possible serial killer. It sounds so crazy, and it's kind of gets swept under the rug. He's implicated with all these other people. It's kind of like what happened with...
Well, he hung out with Gary Glitter.
Gary Glitter?
Who's a pedophile to this day. Gary Glitter dead or alive? Jimmy Savile died. That's when this stuff all came out.
Right.
But Gary Glitter, I think he's in jail, or he's living in Thailand, still molesting people.
Oh, my God. But it kind of gets at this point of, like, what the hell is going on in politics, where you get these little brief moments. The Sandusky case in America was one of them. You had this whole thing in Boys Town in Omaha in the 80s, where people in the highest levels of power get implicated in just the most horrifying possible things you can imagine, and it's just not common knowledge.
Our research has pulled us into this Franklin scandal, Nebraska stuff, where during the Bush Senior administration, where young boy prostitutes were touring the White House at night. Then the Franklin cover-up, there's documentaries on YouTube. If you look at that, it's just horrific. It's overwhelming. You start to think, does everybody who gets into positions of power become a pedophile?
Right.
It's across the board. It's in royalty, politics, and in superstar positions.
This is one level of it, and that stuff you can explain as, okay, it's political blackmail. It gets into some weird, stuff about secret societies or whatever, but it can still be explained rationally. Then the next level is, okay, hey, wait a minute, maybe the moon landing wasn't real. Maybe the moon is hollow and swarming with aliens. Maybe there's like interdimensional reptile people inhabiting the bodies of all of our leaders. It's just saying, like, when you start getting into this stuff, it's just this ball of wax that rolls and rolls, and people that...
As soon as you start talking about conspiracy theories...
people that aren't into this stuff just assume that it's all irrational, and clearly there's some stuff that's put out there as a trap to discredit and confuse conspiracy theorists. There's some stuff that is verifiably true, but it's so distasteful you can't even really talk about it in polite company.
My dad and I, at Thanksgiving dinner, played a joke together. We had a lot of extended relatives there. My dad said, everybody go around the table and say the craziest thing that you really believe to be true. We knew what our answer was going to be. We were all prepared.
Your family Thanksgiving sounds way better than mine.
It's awesome. Instead of watching football like everybody else's family, we actually used to sit down when I was younger and watch Webster Tarpley. Everybody's like, it's Webster Tarpley time.
We watched the Lions play the Cowboys.
Yeah, exactly. No, so we went over. My dad and I knew what we were going to say because my dad and I had spent hours together researching the hollow moon. And my dad...
You're crazy.
My dad and I read Who Built the Moon. We go around the table at Thanksgiving. He says, just say the wildest thing that you really believe to be true. Let's all just admit something. Just one fact. And so people go around, and I totally forget what their answers are. They were totally middle of the road, like... I believe shooting stars are angels, or whatever. And we get to my dad, and my dad and I, we go, we believe the moon is hollow. It was towed into place by aliens. It's not really a satellite. It's a spaceship, and it's held in place by the Van Allen radiation belt. We're all prisoners, so we're doomed. We give up. Happy Thanksgiving. And everybody's like, what? And anyway, so then another time, my dad and I were on a trip, on a tour, on a vacation in Europe with a group of really old people. Every castle that we went to, we saw reptilian iconography, like reptiles carved into the fireplaces. We went through the Loire Valley to chateaus, and we went all through France. Every castle had geckos or snakes or these reptilian characters. And my dad's like, this is really weird. So we'd ask the tour guide on the tour, why so many reptiles? And they had all these theories that they believed in shedding their skin was transformational because that meant a strong leader could transform. And they also had salamander imagery, where it was salamanders the only animal that can walk through fire. My dad and I were like, yeah, we don't buy it. So we were at lunch in this piazza, and there was a show for the kids where there was a building and giant animated reptilian characters with dragons' faces jumped out randomly out of the castle windows and went, ah, and breathed fire and came back in. These half man, half reptile creatures. And my dad and I were like, what? So we say to this group of really old people on this tour, and they go, why are there dragons coming out of the windows? Why did they pick dragons? And my dad goes, well, there's a theory that the ruling elite are really a species of reptilian underclass. And he goes, oops, sorry, wrong audience. And he looks at me and he kind of raised his eyebrows.
Well, so it's something that, you and your dad can talk about, something that you and I can talk about. It's great to, find other people who have just a total flexibility of mind and are willing to entertain these topics, are willing even to listen to stuff there are certain conspiracy theory sites that I know to be just full of crap that I still will read because it's interesting to me to see, what are the lies that are being propagated in this community, or what, what sort of angle are they going to take? It almost becomes like a fun game.
It's kind of thrilling and exciting. What's that website that you said I got all excited and I told you dolphins were aliens? Or
the Sorka Fall.
Yeah, Sorka Fall, and you were like, Daniela, that's Sorka Fall.
Yeah, well, because that's a weird one, because sometimes there will be things that are actually quite plausible, and then the next day it will be an ancient race of alien whales is nearing planet Earth.
Yeah.
I cannot even talk about practical politics with a lot of people, family members. So how do you bridge this gap where some of us who have been sort of in this world for 10, 15, some people 50 years, jump back from this into being able to relate to a normal person?
Well, I think there's two different things going on here. When you become like my dad and I in our relationship, it's hard for me now to get my dad to come back to practical politics. And you have to remember, this is a guy who was in the military for 30 years, an airline pilot, went to Stanford University. This is a really linear guy, okay? And now that my dad and I have been delving into into the fun aspects and going crazier and crazier with this conspiracy stuff, now when I tell my dad we have to get back to FDR, New Deal politics, it's the only answer here because we're in a depression, my dad agrees with me intellectually, but I can tell it's not as exciting. Then, on the other end of my family, it's hard for me to even bring up 9/11 was an inside job. They just don't want to hear it, and they're mad, and they get their news from CNN and MSNBC. They're starting to become a little bit open, easing up a little bit. Maybe I've been on the radio. They've had to listen to my shows, had to read a lot of the literature from UFA and Tax Wall Street Party and stuff like that. So they're starting to open up a little bit. And I think for them, taxing Wall Street and all of our program points make perfect sense. It's just that it's hard to go into areas like to talk about this downed airplane possibly being a false flag to implicate Russia. They won't want to hear about that.
Can I posit something? Thinking about this the last couple of days has got me to realize why secret societies like the Freemasons exist. And makes me feel like those of us need to stop trying to get the general public to enter at our level of awareness, which is often years down the road from point zero, and think about it in the same way as a secret society where you need, and disclaimer, I don't have any personal knowledge of any of that stuff, but...
You didn't have to make that disclaimer.
You know what I mean. We are schmoes. But saying you need to, enter at an entry level of knowledge, and, we need to figure out how to get somebody in on the ground floor, which often is politics. And even, within politics, we've found that if you're talking to somebody who has a certain set of axioms about how the world works, you can't just say, all right, here's how we're going to nationalize the Fed, ba-ba-boop-ba-da-ba-da. You need to start them at a really at a level that they can relate to, which is often something like the Wall Street sales tax, or
Well, I mean, it was only, like I said, there's the two sides of my family. There's extreme conspiracy theorists who of their own volition sit down and watch all sorts of stuff. They'll watch David Icke. They'll do all that, like the ones that watch Webster Tarpley specials at Christmas. And then the other... Webster does Christmas specials. He really does. You know he does. He did a He did a 2014 New Year's Christmas special. Yeah. And then the other side of my family, like I said, who only got their news from CNN and MSNBC, they didn't really know, and none of their friends know, that the Federal Reserve is private. And if they finally do know, they can't wrap their head around what the implication of that is.
Right.
They still kind of look at me like, okay, well, why is that a problem?
Do you think... I struggle with this. Like, are certain people just not wired to deal with these things? Like, some people have a mind that's a bit more expansive or more able to open itself up to these kinds of possibilities. And why is it that some people can't even get to first base and other people, like us, are off just diving and swimming around in the murkiest waters? It's to the point where I'll have a stressful day and, oh man, my kids were really tough today. Okay, I'm going to go listen to some interviews about satanic ritual abuse.
Oh, when I got off the Webster Tarpley program this morning, I was so tired because I really had to research hardcore, realistic facts for the campaign. And when I got off, I just laid down in my bed for a little while listening to some occult satanic ritual, whatever, like one of those videos. And I find that stuff extremely relaxing. What?
Yeah, it just sounds insane. I think that the point of it is...
But if I showed that to the mainstream side of my family, they would not even want to watch it for 2 minutes. They would get exasperated, irritated, and say, why would you be watching this stuff? This is just nonsense. This is some internet crazy people.
Yeah.
And get angry about it.
Yeah. Why would it be relaxing? I think it might have something to do with it removes responsibility from you. If you believe that the world is like full of blood-drinking lizards, it's like, well, what am I in my apartment or my little house going to do about that?
That's a very good point. It becomes like a sci-fi movie, or it's just so overwhelming that you can't do anything about it, so you just have to sit back and enjoy the ride. I know I have a laundry list of actual actions and tasks in the real world to do. I have to count ballot signatures. You write press releases. All the things that we have to do during the day. That's extremely stressful. This is, like you said in the last episode, not glamorous work. It's out in the hot sun. That's like having a job. Listening to the moon is not real. Is downtime at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's kind of escapist. And I mean,
escapist, yeah.
We've said a lot of negative things about people like David Icke, but, I enjoy reading that kind of stuff. I think he actually has a lot of interesting things to say. I think he's courageous in some respects.
I even think Russell Brand, well, I'm starting not to be able to watch it just because I know where he's coming from, and he kind of starting to repulse me. But he's still a funny guy. You called me the other day and you said, you know what, I got to admit something, this guy's really funny. I'm like, yeah, well, that's why he's a national asset. But that's a whole different discussion. But I like listening to Alex Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to Alex Jones's analysis of the plane crash in Ukraine. But I'm saying, how are you going to get enough people to go from the escapist realm to you can actually do stuff that can make real-world change? All hope is not lost. We're effectively probably going to get down on the ballot for U.S. Senate, like we said in other episodes, with a handful of people and a few $1,000s. We're pushing the Democratic candidate to being a populist. We're also pushing the right-wing candidate.
We're making it uncomfortable for SAS by bringing up these issues that even, the conservatives are going to care about. If you care about your family farm, SAS is just out there saying, look at me, I'm on a tractor. And we are out there saying, bring back the parity price and here's what it is. And it reframes the debate around real issues and not around sort of what the political class has decided that you can talk about.
You were saying that SAS needs to look people in the eye in Nebraska and talk about a protective tariff. That was, for 200 years of our American history, that was part of the dialogue.
Right. And when people find that out, then they're going to say, hey, why is this guy not talking about this? What is he hiding from us? I mean, back to like the David Icke thing. If you take him at his word on everything he says, the solution is wake up your friends and neighbors and be the change you want to see in the world. In short, it's kind of the same as Russell Brand. It's kind of truth vibrations.
Well, they're not suggesting doing anything. They're just saying become infinite consciousness, meditate. It's like their solution is wake up.
Yeah.
But wake up to what? And wake up for what?
It's the same as turn on, tune in, drop out.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that.
Timothy Leary. It's they don't come out and say it in exactly those terms, and I think David Icke maybe actually is a little more practical in some things. Do you remember there's this case of this Holly Grieg, who was a girl with Down syndrome in Scotland, I think, who had been abused by some sort of
I remember that, yeah.
And he does what we are saying is impossible to do, which is to make these kind of difficult topics, to popularize them and make people comfortable discussing them. I think, people like him and Alex Jones are the reason that people are so comfortable with something like 9/11 Truth. You said the other day, what was it, 75% of the people
78, don't believe. Yeah. Is all this truth going to help us change the world, or a sand trap? Say we're dealing with those two sides of my family, the woken up group and the mainstream group. Mm-hmm. To get the woken up group to come back into practical politics is a chore, and I can just as easily get the people who never woke up, right, to believe in a New Deal platform. But in a way, it's almost harder to the people who have gone really far in conspiracy theories, because it's almost become an addiction they don't want to come back from.
Yeah.
I don't think that the mainstream side of my family ever needed to attend one David Icke lecture, listen to one episode of Alex Jones to understand why we need to tax Wall Street, have these nuts and bolts kitchen table issues. They get them, since they are more in mainstream practical reality, they understand, okay, what do we need to do as their first response in a way? Donate, get out on the streets, the dynamics of me running a candidate, whereas the conspiracy side might be a little bit more like, what's the point? It's all over.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when I said before, that the conspiracy community needs to function almost like a secret society, I think what I mean is that the person on the street does not realize that your political leaders are blackmailed to high heaven for pedophilia, for all kinds of just terrible stuff. They don't realize that just everything they're hearing on the news is a lie, and why that's happening, and who's in control, and where the money really comes from.
Right.
There are certain things that they might be able to understand and respond to.
I mean, and that is a major problem, because now going backwards, if I listen to an hour of CNN, it's almost shocking, how much propaganda it is second by second. All I can do is pick apart the pieces of propaganda and the lies, and it makes me physically sick. I have to turn it off. I can't be in the same room when a mainstream news channel is playing.
Right. I'll quote two people. One is Webster, and I think he was quoting Antonio Gramsci, who is this sort of anti-fascist Italian socialist, who he talks about having the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. Mm-hmm. Or Jesus Christ, who said, "Be wise as serpents and gentle as doves." And I think the point is, you do need to know this kind of stuff, but you need to use it for a positive purpose. And the goal of knowing George Bush is under blackmail for having gay relationships with Jeff Gannon and all this kind of crazy stuff that you get into, it's not to expose that fact and to ruin George Bush. It's basically, you need to understand what you're up against, and you're going to push through what the people need.
Right.
And you don't need everybody to understand what they're up against.
Think about it. It has bled into extremely practical things. It was the truther community in a way that might have saved us from the beginning of World War III back with Syria. Exposing people over and over again to the idea of a false flag, the strategy of tension that's going on with all these bombings, the number of people who believe there was something wrong with 9/11. That fact means that people are much quicker to spot false flag terror. I don't even want to get into things like Sandy Hook, but look what happened, how quickly the world...
Look what happened with Sandy Hook, whatever you think of that. Nobody stayed on that. Nobody stayed on the Boston Marathon. Look how long the world was wrapped in attention over O.J. Simpson.
Right.
And then they come in and say, oh my God, a guy shot up an entire school full of children, and then the Batman shooting, and then and you go from thing to thing, and the average response of the person in the public is kind of like, all right, whatever,
I've heard this before. A lot of people don't trust it anymore. I think it's because the amount of people that are awake to the idea of false flags. And so now people first say, before they say, oh, that's real, there's something wrong with this picture here.
Yeah, I've kind of seen that with people I know. I mean, part of it, you could say, oh, it's like the banality of evil, and they're sort of just, they're numbing people to horror so that they can get away with ever greater horrors. I think that's part of it. It's like right now Israel is just running roughshod on Gaza, and everyone's kind of like, all right, what's next?
Yeah, that's horrible.
It's hard to get people to pay attention to serious crises that are going on. But at the same time, I think like you said, people are suspicious of the media, they're suspicious of politicians, and they just kind of don't.
Well, that suspicion allowed for World War III not to happen with Syria. The public didn't unanimously blame the chemical attacks on Assad like the news was saying.
Yeah, we're recording on a couple days after this flight at MH17, the Malaysian airline that crashed in Ukraine. Of course, all of the warmongers like John McCain and that whole group is running out saying, only Russia could have done this, we gotta respond, blah, blah, blah. You don't see anybody in the public, even on like comment boards, saying, we gotta go get Russia. Everyone is either confused or saying, well, let's just wait and see how they sort it out.
Nobody believes it.
And that wasn't the case. Like on 9/11, people were just foaming at the mouth with rage, and now it's kind of like, all right, I've been lied to so many times that just nothing is going to work anymore.
Precisely. They were foaming for rage for a few years until they slowly started to wake up, and now, within a day, my whole Facebook wall is filled with commenters explaining why Russia had no motive.
Right.
And posting deeper things about it. They're realizing that there's economic ties. All wars are bankers' wars. And this thing with Putin's time with the BRICS Bank was only a few days before. At least people are questioning it instead of reacting.
And I think that's maybe the road into this stuff is...
Sorry about the thunder.
That's all right.
I'm just partying with Zeus.
I think maybe the road into... that connects these things together... Like, let's put aside all the crazy stuff about whatever the moon is a hollow alien base or whatever, because a lot of that stuff is very interesting, but there's not a direct way to verify any of it.
Right. Whereas, I'm wondering if the two can exist simultaneously. Can you have practical politics on the ground, but then if we're all trapped within this Van Allen radiation belt and we can't leave, and the moon is effectively a prison watchtower that's keeping us trapped on this prison planet, the hell is the point? Yeah,
I guess that's the danger when you start to get into those things. And you actually do get to a lot of these people who say, no, it's a spiritual war, so it can't be won in practical terms. Like,
all they're hearing from the alternative media is that this is a spiritual war. And if it's a spiritual war, then you know what? That's really falling into the hands of the elite.
If it's a spiritual war, why are you and I not spirits? Why does it hurt when I bump my head? Or why do I have to eat to stay alive? Why did God put us on Earth in physical bodies with physical and, like, economic needs if the whole point is we've got to, like, all harmonize our consciousness and all this stuff? It gets at exactly what we were talking about, a number of weeks ago with Calvinism versus Catholicism. Do humans have a role in the universe? Or are you just, like... either a puppet of God or some reflection of consciousness, or, this gets into pretty deep areas of discussion that is like the whole foundation of religion and everything. But
that's always been my big argument, a complete emphasis on spirituality or psychedelic drug taking or this escape from reality. It's like almost seems heretical to me that if God put you on Earth to have a human experience, even if there are other dimensions, which I believe there are other dimensions, that's fine. And there are different types of creatures and entities within these different dimensions, and we live in a multidimensional universe. But if we were put, by whatever power in the universe, into a human body to have a human experience, we're supposed to have that experience fully. Our job is not to try to get out of here. It's to live as fully as we possibly can here, and to affect physical change. That's why, like you said, when you bump your knee, or when I slid on the water today and you said I was like a baby deer on ice, I hit my palms and crashed my knees, which are swollen. If we're supposed to have this physical reality where we need to eat and have shelter in order to do our human work, we're not supposed to just live in a hut trying to get to the next dimension. When we're supposed to be in the next dimension, we'll be in the next dimension. And then I hope that we won't be trying to get back to this dimension, that we'll be doing our work in that dimension. It's heretical. You're basically saying to God, you made a mistake. I'm not supposed to be human.
Right. That's like the whole thing with all the Nirvana religions where it's just, what is it, samsara, like life is all suffering and you basically just need to end your karmic cycle so you can get out of here and just be part of like the pool of infinite consciousness and all this stuff. It's just... Or
to end the ego. That's another one. I'm not coming at this from a completely naive point of view. I'm coming from this from a theological background, and I'm coming at this from like years of wanting to be a nun. I'm a very spiritual person. I've taken psychedelics in my life. I feel sometimes when I listen to our show that it's like the square hour. Sometimes the people who are the most radical are people who have been transformed. Soul on the road to Damascus. Like sometimes I've been an anarchist. I've been a libertarian. I've been a socialist.
You sound like Jesse Ventura. I've been a politician, a fighter, a Navy SEAL. Sorry.
But I just don't want people to think we're like these two square economists who are saying, oh, who are these people who take drugs? Like, I've spent most of my life having every experience you could possibly have. So don't try to argue in the comment section. Now, coming back from all that, if God didn't want you to have an ego needs to be reined in, maybe, and controlled, and there's certain aspects like you need to control yourself with greed and jealousy and
just acquisitiveness. And...
Yeah. If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't be as propelled to action. Like, you're propelled when you write an article because you want to get it right, because you feel good about yourself as a writer.
I hope that... no one would think I'm suggesting that people need to get away from conspiracy stuff and only focus on the practical. But let the conspiracy stuff be your motivation. Let that build your spirit. And let the practical stuff be your action. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this whole idea of, the optimism of the will and the pessimism of the intellect. I went through that same phase as you did with all, the beat poetry and even... Zen Buddhism and all this stuff. I sort of went through like an atheism phase, especially after my dad died when I was a young man anyway, and it was a tough experience for me, and I guess I don't know if I would say I was an atheist, but it's just very angry about everything and blah, blah, blah. But a little bit later, I had a son. My wife and my first son was born with Down syndrome. And we knew that he was going to have Down syndrome when he was in utero. And at that time, I had never really thought about anything like that or thought about what would I do. And, it's something like, this is one thing that I'm surprised that anti-abortion activists never talk about. 90% of fetuses with Down syndrome are aborted, maybe at 20 weeks of gestation on average. And they are like kicking and moving and heartbeat,
They're babies.
Yeah, and you see that, the sonogram and everything, and just think, how could I do this to my child? I mean, I don't want to be preachy about it, but I have not studied Rudolf Steiner extensively. I find some things about him interesting. Some things are pretty spooky to me with all that, he gets into all that theosophy kind of stuff, but he sort of had an interesting take on Down syndrome in the terms that we're kind of talking about, where they're brought into the world with just like pure love and a complete absence of ego. Mm-hmm. I think that maybe that's a bit of a romantic view of it. But it's, I don't know, it's a really interesting counterpoint to someone who maybe had too much ego to have to deal with somebody who is just totally dependent on you on one hand, but also just like gives you total love and total positive feedback. My son is almost like a reflection of what I'm feeling. He's very like responsive to people's moods. He's very responsive to sort of what you're dealing with in your life.
That's one manifestation of humanity, and it's interesting to have all different manifestations. God put your son in the world that way, and then God put other people in the world the way they are, and if you are capable of going out and affecting political change, is it the right thing to cloister yourself away to become like your son?
He put my son in the world in a certain way, but he put me in the world to be the shepherd of my son.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so, like, if you look at that in terms of politics, like when the United Front Against Austerity, we're talking about attacks on the vulnerable. I mean, if you look at, like the Nazi regime as sort of the essence of austerity, their first target was people with Down syndrome and other disabilities. This whole T4 program.
Well, all eugenics movements cover people with mental disabilities.
I would say today that is, people say, oh, eugenics, that's in the past. No, Down syndrome, aborting children for Down syndrome is eugenics, period. And it's also austerity. You're saying we as a society don't have the means to take care of people who are dependent.
Right. Good point.
It's the same way of saying we don't have the means to take care of people in Detroit who don't have water. We don't, and it gets into this whole thing of like the welfare society, and people need to. It's just a question of your basic humanity, and I think when you talk about in terms of politics, like, do you want to abandon 350 million people because they can't agree with you that the moon has a bunch of aliens in it, or that the queen is a blood drinking lizard person? Like, does that knowledge make you superior in the eyes of God? It's ego.
It's ego. Well, there you go. That's the malicious aspect of ego, where it's I'm better than you because I have this knowledge. You can't tell me there's no ego in cloistering yourself away to achieve nirvana, walking around in a robe. That just always seems so egoic. It's like, I am superior spiritually, in a way, and I'm going to achieve some sort of superhuman enlightenment.
And what happens, in India, you got all these gurus sitting in their filth doing mudras with their hands and stuff. What happens to the infant with Down syndrome in that society?
I don't know, probably dead.
Probably left by the side of the road,
Right.
It gets at just, it's ego, where it's all about me and my personal happiness and my personal
That's a very good point. What does happen to all the needy, the sick, the poor, the elderly, the disabled, and what happens to the rest of the people? And that's kind of what these New Age preachers that bleed into politics, that's what we're headed toward. Like Alex Jones says, we're headed toward a police state and fascism, and I'm saying, and you're saying, no, we're headed toward neo-feudalism, which is a form of a caste system, where it's like, who cares about the sick? You go off and you cloister yourself away with your technological gadgets. When you can't take that anymore, take a trip to the jungle and take ayahuasca, but it's all me, 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 me.
Yeah, who's more enlightened? Is it the person who's taken an ayahuasca trip and seen the jaguar person and stuff, or is it? I'm almost like going to be in tears talking about this, but give me a second. I saw a documentary one time about a family who adopted like 20 kids with intellectual disabilities. Excuse me. You look at just the self-sacrifice of some people out there who are overlooked and forgotten, and we all worship celebrity and power and wealth, and you just look at what some people have done for other people. It's just, I don't know.
I've been watching a lot of documentaries on these trips down to South America. Do they come back and do things like that, altruistic things, selfless things? They come back more selfish. They come back and they're just like, I saw Shiva, and now I'm going to live more isolated in my brain because I'm never going to be able to explain to people this 8-armed god that I saw. It's almost like somebody going through some sort of DARPA mind conditioning or something. Like, is that person going to come out? I don't know how to explain. Like, it's all self-improvement, but it's not. Is it improvement? I don't know.
Right, and it's just, I think the essence of being human, in a sense, is self-sacrifice, and it could be in a very direct way where it's for another person or for a group of other people or whatever, or it can be Abraham Lincoln. Look at what he could have done, taken a path that did not get him killed, that did not get all these other people killed, but what does that path lead to? It leads to poverty and misery and the loss of the entire nation. It's at some point people need to have that kind of leadership and that kind of self-awareness to make the sacrifices that need to be made. Like in his case, it was to sacrifice himself and to do some things that were going to be very unpopular and destructive in some ways, because the alternative is so horrible,
Yeah.
And you can't just hide away from having to make those choices all the time.
Do you think people are too removed from seeing the actual horror? Or are people just anesthetized to it now? People need to start to work in teams again or something, because if it weren't for that, I would be extremely isolated. And I think a lot of people are extremely isolated.
I don't know. A lot of people have this idea that, like, our salvation is you've got to start something in your community. You know, you need the urban garden, you need the whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that would be nice, but what's the problem with having friends that you talk to on Skype or that you talk to in the discussion forum or whatever? You know, it's good. If you can find a way to move that into practical action, sometimes that's what you got to do. And then when you get on the ground like a political campaign, you really do need friends. You need people who are going to be able to sacrifice their time for you and for what you're doing. You know?
I just mean being part of a common cause.
Yeah, anybody can do that. I think a lot of what's going on in the left wing is direct action, and that means planting a garden is just as important as...
How do you say without sounding like, no, it's not equally important? It's not equally important. As to nationalize the Fed saves millions of people, brings jobs back to this country. To tax Wall Street brings money to keep people from starving to death. Planting a community garden, but thing a kale or something like once. I don't know. That was just part of me. I could never get involved unless it was going straight to the heart of the matter. Like, remember when I went through the phase where I tried to start my own independent government in California? You're like, Daniela, don't talk about that. That's really embarrassing. It was a stupid idea. I realized that our government just needs to be rescued. There's no reason that I needed to start running a government out of trailers. Out of the valley in LA. This trailer's the Congress. This is the judicial branch. I was going to populate it with like hobos. I was going to say, now we're competing with you, Washington. No, but I heard Stan Monteith talking about that on Alex Jones. He's like, the only way we can do this is to start our own independent government. And I was like, I've got the domain names. You want to buy them? No, but he was saying we have to start our own independent government in another state and compete with Washington. And I was like, what a waste of time. Just go in and rescue the government we've already got. The infrastructure's there.
Webster Tarpley talked about this a number of weeks ago on World Crisis Radio, but go look at a map of Central Europe in the Middle Ages. I guess even in like the 1500s. Mm-hmm. What is now Germany just looks like shattered glass because each little fiefdom was like a nation unto itself with its own laws, its own, ruling structure. It's not like they were states that were aligned in any kind of a federation. It was just completely arbitrary. There's a guy who was visiting all of these feudal knights at the time and kind of writing back home. But he was talking about how, as a feudal knight, you literally, if you wanted to go fishing, you had to wear a full suit of armor because somebody might jump on you and try to murder you. People representing other clans and stuff, like, you couldn't plow your fields without a suit of armor on because people wanted to take your stuff. Just saying, like, the arbitrary rule of feudalism is just crazy. It's like Braveheart or something.
Yeah, that's what all these alternative hosts that want to do away with the federal government are preaching. If we had the Koch brothers and George Soros, even though they kind of run the government from behind the scenes, but at least there's that like little barrier where the politicians have to pass things. Yeah. And if we had a government, imagine half of it was run by the Koch brothers and half by George Soros.
What do you think the courts would be like in the Republic of Kochlandia?
First of all, I don't know what the percentage of black people who are in the prison industrial complex now, but it would be all of them because the Koch brothers are white supremacists. And then on the other side, you'd have George Soros, who would be pushing GMO marijuana on everybody. You'd have zombies and people in jail.
It would be, Peter Thiel, he's a libertarian. He was the guy that was funding Ron Paul's presidential campaign in 2012, and then he's one of the big financiers of this Lawrence Lessig Mayday PAC. He's the guy who started PayPal. Is that right, Peter Thiel?
He might have started it with Elon Musk, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. he's also on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group, which any of our conspiracy theorist listeners are familiar with. Mm-hmm. But he also starts, his big thing is seasteading, or two things. One, he pays kids to drop out of college, which if you're the parent of a college student and Peter Thiel pays your kid to drop out of college, I'm coming to Peter Thiel's house. And then his other thing is seasteading, where he wants to set up extrajudicial floating communities. What is the point of that? What can you not do on the land that you need seasteads to do? You know, you can let your imagination run wild. He's also
like pederastic orgies with Lord of the Flies spears. Or not even what can you do on the land, what can't you do in America with $1 billion and a private mansion up in the hills that he needs to go out to sea? It's, I got invited to this Jeff Berwick, he hosts Anarchast, and I got invited to move to Chile and be part of this libertopian community they were making. It was named after an Ayn Rand character. Something was called like Galtville or something. It was like, it wasn't Galtville, but it was some Ayn Rand character.
Rourkeburg?
No. Where is the place where they all go? All the so-called producers go. Gulch.
Oh.
He was like, dude, you gotta come and be part of Libertopia. And I was like, what the hell's going to go on at Libertopia? And I'm going to be trapped with these people, racketeers. Sound horrible.
It's just, once again, what goes on, what can you not do in America? Basically, pedophilia, narcotics, and, maybe money laundering.
Maybe there's just so many more pedophiles than we think. I've been to Southeast Asia, a city like Bangkok. You walk into a bar, and there's young girls dancing on the bars with numbers, and there's just... they're lined up, like 50 of them, and then there's men who are like bus drivers, and and they're just like, I love to come here on vacation. They're sitting there with their Heineken, and they're like, it's great, and they have two like 12-year-old girls on each arm, and they're like, what a great time you can have here. It's only $10, and you get all these girls. I mean, it's horrifying. It's going on in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia. Almost every young girl and a lot of young boys there are prostitutes.
Oh, God.
I mean, we have a population of 350 million. We have 2 million child slaves. I'm just saying, there's a market for this.
Yeah.
That's just a statistic. So it's like you say, oh, is it these politicians that are doing this, or entertainers?
Let's get back to practical politics. Libertarians talk about, the government's the nanny state. You want your government to be your protector and all this stuff. Government is legitimate power when compared to the arbitrary sexual power of, like, a man over a child prostitute. Because that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. When there's no government, those are the relations that you are reduced to.
Mm-hmm. You'll get some talk show hosts, alternative talk show hosts like an Alex Jones who will yell, well, the government's trafficking in the child prostitutes.
Yeah, who is it? The government printing office is like making a procurement.
There might be some weird dark hands in government that are doing a little bit of that, and there are some politicians, but it's not like the government is the child trafficking. You take the government out of the way, believe me, you will see child trafficking.
This idea that, like, the individual is going to somehow mete out justice is ridiculous, because that's not how it's going to work. Everyone's going to break up into tiny factions and gangs and will cleave to any feudal ruler that's going to offer them a little bit of protection.
People don't come to America for sex industry.
They come to Universal Studios Florida.
No, I'm saying people don't travel here to America for sex tourism. They travel to other countries. Right. Do you know, Americans haven't seen real violence or felt real fear. My grandmother, who was in Hawaii during Pearl Harbor, very, very close to it, and I was 3 blocks away during 9/11. That's a kind of a fear that most people don't necessarily experience in their life, especially in a country like America. In places in Mexico where you have these cartels, there's not a single person that comes from some of these towns that doesn't have family and friends, multiple people that they know that were beheaded and mutilated and murdered.
Yeah.
That is an incredible way to live. That's what you get when you have a corrupt government or anarchy.
Continuing on this whole theme of the realm of pure imagination, the world of pure imagination, you can't let yourself get sucked into purely hypothetical things or purely only research all the time, or basically only things that you can't control. It's like, even if that stuff is real and even if it's very interesting, it's no different than just obsessing over Harry Potter or something.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well be going to frickin' Comic-Con, and some website the other day showed that there was a convention in Pittsburgh for people that dress up like giant furry stuffed animals, and there's this whole weird sexual underground to it.
Ew.
I think they're... How do you get a room full of people together that are all into
What if
this?
we could get those people to...
Let's just leave those people alone. I don't want to talk to those people.
We need more petitioners in Nebraska. It's 100 degrees outside. They're all going to die in their fur suits. The point is that Dan, right now, as we're talking about this, and while people are laying in their beds listening to speculative videos, while people are doing that, Dan's out in 100 degrees. Dan Burdorf, our candidate on the Tax Wall Street Party for U.S. Senate in Nebraska, danfornebraska.com. danfornebraska.com. Please call or donate. He needs your help. And he's standing out in 100 degrees heat collecting petition signatures to get on the ballot.
Yeah, he called me feverishly trying to get directions to like a fireworks display in some little town outside of Omaha so he could get there and collect signatures. So it's just all day, every day, nonstop. I mean, that is the optimism of the will. He's not doing that because someone's paying him. He's not doing it because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing it because he knows that it's right and it's necessary and nobody else is doing it.
And sometimes when I lose my will, Webster Tarpley, who's older than we are, will call me up and say, keep going because you don't realize you're going to look back and see that this made a real difference in 25 years or 50 years. Like, have optimism of the will. Dan standing out collecting petition signatures is world historical.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets on the ballot as the Tax Wall Street Party in Nebraska, where the Omaha platform, the Populist platform started, the Populist Party started, then that's going in the history books.
That's the domino that leads to the next Abraham Lincoln. You know, it just gets down to like this mundane stuff. Like we're looking at companies in Nebraska that used loans from this export-import bank. We talked about this the other week. Popcorn farmers who need to export popcorn to South America or something like that. Those popcorn farmers are going to be out of business and out of luck if anybody but Dan gets elected. Mm-hmm. Just speaking in like a global sense, not, I don't know if one person is going to save him or not. You know, it's like with Lincoln, without the Homestead Act, I'm not here talking to you. Mm-hmm. And who knows where any of us are. Because my, ancestors were able to have farmland through the Homestead Act, or without, the public university system set up by Lincoln, without the Transcontinental Railroad, which enabled the steel industry. It's just, these very practical things that just totally change the dynamic within somebody's life, which make the difference between you're a 12-year-old prostitute dancing for a bunch of fat slobs in Bangkok versus you are trying to figure out how to, land a robot on Mars or whatever is,
right.
come up with something that happens today with high technology.
And if people keep pushing to end the federal government, like the billionaire criminals want, instead of trying to rescue the federal government, we're going to get people who are dancing on the bars for money. If you go to any rural town, there's a lot of strip clubs and people stripping for money. It's the same type of thing. We're going down that road. Those same women could be getting an education and putting people on Mars. Instead of speculating whether the face on Mars is real or not, why don't we put, some of the people who are on these service industry jobs back to work, putting people on Mars to find the hell out.
Yeah, you tied it together.
We were saying earlier, are some actions bigger or more important than other actions? Is organizing to bring industry back to America and taxing Wall Street bigger than a community garden? Or is it all equal in the eyes of God? Without being incredibly insulting, I say no. I mean, we were talking about the history books. Dan's action, like we said, will be in the history book. It might be the first domino for a new FDR coming in. Mm-hmm. Pushing like de Blasio to the left in New York City and now pushing this race is creating this culture of populism that could allow a real fighter for the people into office. It makes it much more likely that somebody like an Elizabeth Warren, well, not that she's great or anything, but she's, better than a Hillary Clinton, might be president. It just lays the groundwork for something like that. So is it more important than a community garden? I think that people should dedicate themselves to a local cause and then also a big national cause. People can do both. Like, you have an organic garden. You find time to listen to stuff about reptilians, but then we also have time to dedicate ourselves to this big national cause.
I used to like Ralph Nader a lot. I still have a lot of respect for him. He used to talk about bird watching, just the idea that there are people who will dedicate so much passion and energy and stuff to watching and identifying birds, or to, these people that'll go to like a baseball game and they're writing down all the scores and all that kind of stuff. Why can't everybody put that same level of passion into their government? Mm-hmm. Whether it's at the level of your school board and, getting involved with that, getting involved with your city council, or, whatever. Spend a little time every week going to online forums and leaving some comments, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Or are you able to build up to the point, and do you have some skills that you can apply to something like this, like a national political race?
Can you run for office yourself? I mean, like we said, we're getting Dan on the ballot for U.S. Senate with a handful of people and a couple $1,000. Mm-hmm. There are many people who can contact us if they want to run on this party too in different states.
And if you can't run for office tomorrow, I'm not running for office, so I'm doing what I can do. If you say, well, I don't have a lot of time to do a whole lot, you've got enough time to set up a Twitter account and forward some information about an issue like this to, Nebraska newspapers.
Yes.
Something like that. Act as the news bureau and devote a little bit of time to something like that,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be huge, but it's just
a start towards some federal action to rescue your federal government. We leave today's episode with Dan Burdorf's campaign commercial for U.S. Senate in Nebraska. You've been listening to UCY.TV. Have a blessed evening.
There's a better world that's a-comin', tell you why. There's a better world that's a-comin', tell you why. We will beat 'em on the land, on the sea, and in the sky. There's a better world that's a-comin', tell you why. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see.
I want to preserve and protect workers, and protect elderly, and protect veterans and children and the sick with a strong social safety net. I want the Wall Street sales tax. It's the fairest tax you can think of. It's a targeted tax on financial speculators that pushes investment back into productive industries. So we want to tax Wall Street, not Main Street. And that Wall Street needs to pay their fair share with a small sales tax. And I'm running on an economic populist platform that targets key areas to bring growth and development to Nebraska and the country. I'm the 21st century infrastructure candidate, and I have a plan to get America's infrastructure from a barely passing D-plus grade given by the American Society of Civil Engineers. I want to bring that D-plus grade to an A grade by tapping the productive potential of the Federal Reserve's credit power. We can mobilize the Fed to issue credit to states and municipalities to rebuild and improve infrastructure, and I think that's very important. So let's take the Federal Reserve under the control of Congress, make the Federal Reserve act like a national bank, and start repairs and major new projects coast to coast to bring high-paying, high-value jobs to American workers and companies. Go to my website, learn more about me there. If you agree with me, support me at danfornebraska.com. An army marches on its stomach, as we say. We could use some experienced petitioners to help us in Nebraska because the Wall Street sales tax is key to put an end to this nonsense. That's why I chose to run on the Tax Wall Street Party.
We'll beat 'em on the land, in the sea, and in the sky. There's a better world that's coming, I'll tell you why.